Yeah, it's an offense to Christ to even consider that anybody can sit there and think about any entropic kind of thought, racism, sexism, bestiality, homosexuality, blasphemy, to think those thoughts, accusative thoughts, to accuse someone of those things, or to think of those things for those things, is an offense to Christ. Just to even consider that anybody can and not be an offense to Christ is an offense to Christ. It's this whole society being an offense to Christ. So, here I am. I don't think of that stuff, but I have to deal with their presentation of it. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to think, I don't. So they ignore that it's out there. They ignore all the stuff, and they run from it. And they start supporting it because they don't want to have to deal with the pressure that if they don't, from the society, ends of the world are upon us. You see, the end result of the attitude of the society is going to attack you. That's what that meant. It didn't mean that he thought the apocalypse was upon him. It means ends, as in means to an end, or end result, the ends. What's the ends of this argument, And that's what that meant, obviously. Because it's 2,000 years later, and the world didn't end back then. If Paul was saying the world was going to end while he was alive, it was the end of the world, then, in the sense of the apocalypse, then he was wrong, wasn't he? It's obviously not what he's saying, because it's obviously not the case. If you have any faith, you'll figure that out. You'll look up the Greek, and you'll also find to understand that ends means end result. What are the ends of this argument? And that's what's going to attack you. And people don't want to deal with it. I was in a college class once in Memphis, in a philosophy class, and it was, philosophy 1. They were supposed to be talking about Plato, and all of a sudden she brings up, because there was a woman mentioned in one of Plato's things, one of Plato's stories, and so she brought up feminist issues, modern philosophy, and the main thing that she was talking about was the current topic at that time, about 2002, was there were a bunch of feminists, lesbians most likely, saying that gender didn't exist. The idea of gender itself was a social construct. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. You're born with gender. Gender isn't a social construct. They're confusing it with gender roles. Gender roles may be a social construct. That's a viable argument. But saying that gender itself is a social construct is utterly obtuse. I got attacked by almost every student in there. Everything I said after that, they were like, "You're closed-minded. You never been." They assumed I was some idiot that had never been anywhere. And they're like, "Well, straight white male, is that how you define yourself?" I was like, "Look, I'm 140 IQ. I grew up in Europe. I saw almost every major work of art and architecture in Europe by the age of 12." And she was like, "I don't care where you've been. I don't care what your IQ is." And I was like, "Look, I just described how part of the way I define myself, just like you said, is that how you describe yourself?" And I was like, "No, these are aspects that I describe myself. I really don't worry about whether I'm white or not. And I know I'm straight. I don't really worry about it. I guess that's part of my definition. That's not the entire thing, And I was showing her that clearly, and she took it to mean that I was boasting, And she was like, "I don't care where you've been. I don't care what your IQ is, And but I wasn't boasting. I was giving her other things that I define myself by, which is what she asked for. But they weren't listening. And they were assuming, we couldn't get through I mean, it locked up. Unless everybody's in agreement with them, they will not let anything progress. It's like a guy I used to be buddies with, and he moved off. And, you know, before you act like I'm some chauvinist, because, you know, these are supposedly feminist ideas, but they're not. They're just perverse queer ideas, because the queers usurped the feminist movement, just like now they're usurping the racial equality movement. The idea of gay marriage. You know, I was talking, I said, you know, I was living in Memphis, and I had emails going back and forth, and I just got all the shit off my head from that class, you know, and I talked to the teacher afterwards, you know, and she was a little more reasonable. She was like, well, most people don't understand things as well as you, you know. And she was reasonable. She's like, I'm not gonna bring that subject up again, because she saw how I was viciously attacked and vilified for having my own opinion that was different than what the people in philosophy were saying. My different stance, you know. It's not really opinion, it's a fact. You're born with gender. And they pretty much trashed that one, because it was like when my sister, get off top, it's to go on this tangent, when my sister was going to a college, University of Wilmington, or North Carolina and Wilmington, I think it was, they were starting to teach that Hitler wasn't really a bad person necessarily. He was just a product of his environment because of the social pressures at the time. And she went off, because we'd been to Dachau when we were kids. We saw what they did. I mean, we were standing right where it happened. I was looking directly into the shower rooms where they gassed them. And there was a picture of them dead right there. Picture of the dead bodies of the Jews right where I was looking, you know, is where it happened. I was like 7, 8 years old. And she saw it too. And then I saw that picture of that one doctor who chopped off, he tortured people, and he had 2 twins together, doing experiments on twins. He chopped off the top of their heads and they had their brains exposed. And they were alive, and he'd do experiments on them, cut one, see if the other felt. He had diodes hooked up to him. And it was right where I was standing. That's where that happened. That's where he did that, right where I was standing. Makes it a little more real, because she went fucking off. She started raising hell about it on campus, and they pulled out. All it takes is one fucking person standing up against this kind of goddamn bullshit on a campus hard enough, and they withdraw it. The only reason they get away with it is because nobody does anything about it. Nobody says anything. Everyone's too scared they're going to get accused. It takes people who have confidence and know about things, I guess. Because she had seen that stuff secondhand. Yeah, we weren't prisoners of Dachau, but we were there at Dachau, standing where it happened. So she knew it. And she knew that was bullshit. And they knew they couldn't bullshit her because she'd been there. You know, she'd seen that stuff. She knew what it was. They couldn't bullshit her with her ignorance, because she didn't have ignorance of it. And that's what they're doing with all this stuff. And and then that teacher, she never brought that up again in philosophy course. See, they're testing. As soon as I got that shit off my head, I'm talking to Ryan, and he brings up the exact same shit to put it back on my head. I'm like, man, what are you, he just took the fucking role of the devil immediately after I got all that stuff off me. And then, he goes on about gay marriage and shit. And I'm like, look, I saw a dude got married to a car once, and I was a little less, knowledgeable back then about what they were doing, I knew they were pulling shit, but, I was like, look, I don't agree with it, and I don't think any preacher should marry a queer couple, but, you know, whether it's legal or not, you know, whatever. And he was like, you know, I was like, look, man, and he kept pressing it. I was like, look, man, we're going to have to agree to disagree here. And then we get on to other topics about astrophysics or about evolution and whatnot. Just different ideas that weren't academic is what I would present. Stuff from my own thoughts. You know, like a different theory of evolution. I'm not saying I believe in evolution. Anyway, every time I would talk to Ryan about, you know, write to Ryan about this stuff, it was after the class where I'd, the philosophy class where the woman brought up the newer philosophy of where they suppose there was no gender, that gender was a social construct, and I said that's ridiculous, and I got attacked, and then I got all that stuff off my case, and then, you know, he immediately brings up the same talks, and, you know, and then he wants to talk about gay marriage, and, you know, I'm like, you know, I'm not with it. You know, and I was like, well, let's agree to disagree and talk about other stuff. So I talk about all these other stuff, and he would act like what you would stereotypically consider a fundamentalist Christian when any of his fundamental beliefs are questioned. We're like, start going off and calling names. It's the opposite now. It's academic dogma. If you question any of the things they've been taught in academia, because they believe, you know, that they were, you know, they were becoming sophisticated and improving their intelligence, and they trusted the system, and they learned it, and they sacrificed a lot of stuff, and then you question it, they start calling you names, and he'd always bring up gay marriage again, and say I was some kind of bigot, and because he didn't want to deal with the discussions. His mind went into panic and fear because I was making sense that wasn't taught to him as a PhD in college. See, we used to live together. He used to be a real free thinker. We'd talk about, you know, philosophy all the time, and he used to know how to think freely. And then, you know, he got up with, you know, this woman. She was a eco-feminist. She was his philosophy teacher, and they got married, and he changed, and he you know, he went through the school system, and that changed him. It's funny though, because she was all eco-feminist, hardcore, and then they had kids, and then all she wanted to do was stay home and take care of her kids. And which there's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, he'd start, you know, calling me closed-minded and a bigot and conditioned and all this stuff, and it was like, dude, you know, I'm trying to discuss things with you here, and you are not accepting my agreement to disagree with you. You are pushing that shit every time I try and talk about anything else. I'm moving on here, and you're not. And we just ceased communication, and that was it. You know, been friends with that guy for a long time, and he started started thinking I was all of a sudden worthless human being because I didn't agree with gay marriage. And, you know, whatever.